How's it going, fellas? My name is Andy, and today I'm gonna talk about Chris Paul, who I believe is one of the most polarizing players in NBA history. Some fans think that as an individual player, he's a top 5 or top 6 point guard of all time, probably better than guys like Steve Nash, Jason Kidd, or Gary Payton. And then there's the other end of the spectrum. The fans that think Chris Paul is incredibly overrated because even though he puts up some great numbers, he has never translated that into any playoff success. Everyone knows by now that after 12 seasons in the NBA, CP3 has never got past the second round of the playoffs. Obviously, he did have some bad luck with injuries and stuff like that, so that's unfortunate, but it happens. I'm gonna talk about both sides of this argument and explain why he's both underrated and overrated at the same time. Alright, first off, I'm gonna tell you guys why Chris Paul is underrated. When it comes to consistency, Paul should be the definition of that word. In his 12 seasons in the league up until now, he has never averaged more than 3 turnovers a game for a season. In fact, out of every other player in NBA history who averaged more than 9 assists per game for their careers, Paul has by far the best assist to turnover ratio, generating an average of 4.1 assists for 1 turnover. For comparison, Magic Johnson, who's considered to be the greatest point guard of all time, has an assist to turnover ratio of just 2.9. Now, I'm not saying CP3 is better than Magic because he's not, but in terms of taking care of the ball, CP3 is without a doubt the greatest ever in that regard. And when you actually watch him play, it's very clear how smart and calculated he is when he's running the offense. He typically never makes flashy passes or anything like that, but he makes the solid safe passes that hardly ever get stolen. Oh, and since we're on the topic of offense, Chris Paul also has the highest career offensive rating in NBA history. No, not just in the current NBA, in history. Individual offensive rating is basically an estimate of how many points per 100 possessions a player produces when he's on the floor. If we look at another stat, offensive box score plus minus, Paul is ranked 3rd in NBA history behind only LeBron James and Michael Jordan. Basically what this is telling me is that he's one of the top most efficient offensive players in history due to his combination of solid scoring, passing, and committing very few turnovers. As of now, he also has the 2nd highest win shares per 48 minutes, just behind MJ, but barely. Win shares basically calculate how much a player's game contributes to team wins, using an aggregate of all the box score stats. So my point in showing all of these stats is to show that statistically, as an individual player, Paul is one of the greatest of all time. The impact that he has on the court is as great as any other player in history. The way he elevates his teammates is incredible, and I don't think anybody can argue against that. I don't think DeAndre Jordan would even been selected to 3 straight All-NBA teams if he did not have Chris Paul on his team. Paul's playstyle might not be too exciting, but it's effective, and he led the Clippers to their best 6-year stretch in franchise history. He's also one of the best defenders at his position, despite being barely 6 feet tall, so he's the complete package. In theory, there are no weaknesses in his game. Those are pretty much the reasons why I think Paul is really underrated and should be recognized as an all-time great. Now let's take a look at the other end of the spectrum, why he's overrated. Even though statistically the advanced stats say that he's on the same level as MJ or LeBron, we all know that's not true. In recent years, people have become obsessed with numbers and stats, but there's a lot more to basketball than just that. Now, I'm gonna give you guys 2 main reasons why I think CP3 is kinda overrated. 1, he is too consistent. I know this may sound crazy, but bear with me. We all know Paul is probably the most consistent player in the entire league, but that's not always a good thing. A lot of times he cannot completely take over a game because I think his peak performance is not as high as some other star players. We see guys like Westbrook, Harden, and Curry drop 50-point triple-doubles or something crazy like that, and they have a ton of huge games throughout the year. While those guys have more bad games too and aren't as consistent as Paul, those type of explosion games are mandatory if you want to make a deep playoff run. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I don't think Paul is capable of doing that. I don't think he's capable of just exploding for 50 points when his team needs it. Efficiency and consistency are great, and Paul is too smart, too calculated to ever take a bad shot or make a bad play. But sometimes you just gotta throw all that stuff out the window, especially in the playoffs when his team needs him to go off and take over the game. The second reason is that offensively, Paul doesn't do that much if the ball is not in his hands. And part of this has to do with his height. He's not very tall, and that limits his ability to do certain things. If you look at other star guards like Westbrook for example, he's extremely athletic with good size, so he can crash the offensive glass or catch alley-oops. And then you look at Harden, who's much bigger and stronger, so he can have an easier time cutting to the paint and catching passes in the paint for layups. And then you look at Steph Curry, who has an extremely quick release on his shot, so the Warriors can run a lot of off-ball catch-and-shoot plays for him. Physically, Paul isn't as gifted as these other guys, and he also has a really slow release on his shot. So most of the time when someone else has the ball on offense, he just stands around and can't really do anything. That's a major reason why him and Blake Griffin didn't really mesh well together on the court. Griffin is also an excellent playmaker and passer, but Paul could not benefit off of him. Every time the offense ran through Griffin, Paul would just stand to the side and pretty much do nothing. The only time it worked well was when Paul had the ball and they would just run pick and roll so he can throw lobs. This type of offense is very efficient, and it makes sense why Paul has the highest offensive rating in history. But during the playoffs, it becomes very predictable and easy to figure out. And those are the reasons why I think CP3 is the most polarizing player in the NBA right now. There are two completely opposite opinions of him, and honestly, I think both of them are reasonable. Some fans value playoff success more than individual stats, and vice versa. However, the facts are still facts. Despite playing with multiple All-Stars throughout his career, Paul has never made it to the conference finals yet. In fact, I got some trivia for you guys. Since the year 2000, there have only been two Western Conference teams that have not made it to the conference finals: the New Orleans Hornets/Pelicans and the Los Angeles Clippers. Paul was the leader on both of those teams when they were trying to contend for a title. On the other side though, if we focus more on his numbers and stats, Paul is in the same category as some of the greatest of all time. In my opinion, as an individual talent, he's a top 5 point guard of all time. But unfortunately, as of right now, his team's success will hold him back. So in terms of greatness and legacy, he's probably not a top 5 point guard in that category. And that's all folks, hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think about Chris Paul and where does he stand among the all-time greats. Thanks for watching and I'll see you next time.